Hey, Mike, what do you think the Bigfoot DNA is going to tell us when it's finally released?
Well, that's an interesting thing to think about, because the problem with it is this. First of all, Bigfoot is a global phenomenon, and people sometimes lose track of that. So, and what I mean by that is that people have been seeing and talking about hairy wild men running around in the woods for centuries all over the planet. If you look at the fossil record in Africa in particular, you have examples of hairy bipedal human-like beings that once roamed the planet. So the fossil record, at least in the eastern hemisphere, backs up the idea of hairy wild men living in the forest. They used to. We ourselves are considered the descendants of wood apes, apes that could live in deciduous forests and not just tropical jungles. And that's the big difference. All the modern anthropoid apes all live on the equator, whereas humans, of course, are everywhere else. And apparently these other bipedal hominids that people report seeing but are not accepted yet by science are also found at all latitudes in all parts of the planet, and much more like humans. So Bigfoot DNA, until it's representing all the mystery primates that are described across the continent, and that would include, well, like the Homo floresiensis, the little hairy, I say hairy because the people there on the island describe them as being hairy, although you'll see renditions of them that have been drawn recently where, like every other animal that's given the genus name Homo, they're shown to be hairless, or relatively so. But I think that these Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores are probably covered in hair, and they're essentially what people are describing as the Sadapa or the orang pendak, this sort of thing. On Hawaii, we were told of menahunis. So, in other words, there are apparently gracile hominids that are seen, little beings 3 feet tall or less, that are reported in various parts of the world and have been forever, both by Native Americans, by Africans, by people in South America, Central America, and so on and so forth. So, that being the case, I think that the Bigfoot phenomenon, which is driven primarily by anecdotes, by eyewitnesses, and by stories that have been told, some of which are probably just legends and others which I believe are true. There's going to be more than one type of animal, or hominid, or ape, or primate, if you will, more than one kind of primate that people have observed when making reports of Yetis or Sasquatch or other of these mystery primates. So understood that people report a Bigfoot, what they're doing is interpreting what they've seen. Now, I don't think that every Bigfoot report is the same kind of an animal. I think that there are, as I pointed out already, the gracile types. I think there are very robust, large, very heavily built bodybuilder type, the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest. The ones that are way up high in in latitudes I think they get really big, and they're pretty still holding to this original form. But I think that there's others that have hybridized. So I think that what we have is a melange, and I break it down basically into 5 things. And these are the 5 things that I think, once DNA from all over the planet has been compared, are going to turn out to be explanations for Bigfoot sightings. Number 1 is a relict hominid. That means a hominid that's left over that we thought went extinct. Let's use Neanderthal as a prime example. Everybody agrees that Neanderthals were really close to us, that we at times hybridized with them, had sex with them, that we have part of their DNA showing up in our DNA, all those of us from European background. So that's well established. But current science suggests that Neanderthals exited the planet, 20,000 years ago, maybe a little more recently than that, but around that time. That there's no examples of Neanderthal skeletons or anything proving that they still exist. Well, I would suggest that that doesn't prove that they don't exist. That only proves that we don't have anything yet to prove their existence. But I got to point out something. We don't have much to prove the existence of chimpanzees during the Pleistocene period. In other words, here are these apes that are quite well known in Central Africa, and yet if you go through the fossil record and try to find something from about the Miocene on indicating the presence of chimpanzees in Africa or anything moving towards that, you'll find a handful of teeth that were discovered that are about 500,000 years old, and that's it. That's all we have in the fossil record to indicate chimpanzees evolving on the planet Earth. So when a scientist tells you something doesn't exist because there's no bones to prove it, well, then they might be suspicious about chimps too, because there's very few bones in the fossil record to back up the existence of chimps either. But the problem is, we have pictures of chimps, we have chimps in zoos, and so forth. So, lack of evidence isn't proof of absence of reality. So I think that some of these are going to turn out to be Neanderthals or things like this that are in our past and proven in the fossil record, but they haven't gone extinct. They have coexisted amongst us as a separate haplogroup, a separate DNA strain, that because of their lifestyle and so forth, they've managed to say, secret it away from us. And they exist in small little gene pools that are in parts of Siberia, for example, and have been there for centuries, isolated. But nonetheless, still continuing on. Then I think that there are going to be, amongst these beings that people report as Bigfoot, hybrids that are half human and half relict hominid. Okay, so I think that there might be some purebred Neanderthals on the planet today, or other things like that. But I also believe that there are hybrids, Neanderthals that have mated with humans, and that they have formed a haplogroup that's separate. And I would suggest that Patty, from the Patterson-Gimlin film, might be such a hybrid, that it's actually half human and half Neanderthal, or Denisovan, or some other life form that we've yet to discover. After all, we have these Denisovans. This is a new human being, only known for about 3 years now to the general public, and we know it only by a tooth and a small finger that was found in a cave. And yet the DNA that came from this shows that these things at one time had sex with the humans that went on to become Melanesians. So we have a haplogroup in Melanesia that carries DNA from this extinct types of humans that were in this cave in Siberia all those many thousands of years ago. So in the last decade we found several examples of hybridizing of humans with other older forms that are considered to be extinct. But that's the question. Are they or aren't they extinct? And are there still living hybrids that carry these genes? I believe there are. Then there's a third type of being that I think is reported from time to time and called a Bigfoot, and that's some type of a feral human. I've talked about this on and off over the years, and this is strictly based on observations and descriptions that I've heard over the past 7 years by people who've come in here, who've had experiences, and who live in parts of the country where this is, very likely to have happened, like in parts of Appalachia. And when a normal civilized person comes in contact with a being in their backyard that's behaving like an animal, that is covered in animal skins or has a hair growth that's abnormal, they're uttering guttural sounds and behaving like animals, which I think some people actually can come to the point where this is the case, where they've lived isolated from other humans for successive generations in an out-of-the-way place, some mountain canyon way out in the middle of nowhere. And they have also done some inbreeding, perhaps. And as a result, we have these beings that come across as being a Bigfoot or something like that, and yet they're actually full-blooded human beings that have just gone feral. I think that's part of the mix and part of the mystery. The other two things that I think cause Bigfoot sightings are apes that are in places where they do not belong, like chimpanzees and orangutans and this sort of thing in Florida and along the Gulf Coast. And most of our North American ape sightings, skunk ape sightings and the ilk, are around the Gulf Coast because that's the most tropical part of North America. And an ape free in North America is going to want to head south because, like I said earlier, all the modern apes all live on the equator, and they want that tropical climate. Florida is the closest they can get. So we have lots of skunk ape sightings in Florida that I think are actually apes, chimps, gorillas, and other things like that. And then the last and not least form of bipedal primate, the fifth version, I think, is going to turn out to be unclassified apes. In other words, a species of ape that's extant, that's still living on the planet with us today, that indigenous people have been describing for years, but that we didn't want to accept as real. And we have the history of the gorilla and the orangutan and other animals that back up this concept. Because in the past, when the academic authority figures were told by indigenous people that there's a gorilla out there or something else, that was denied by the intelligentsia and considered folklore.